Hi everyone, welcome to the first episode of Peas in the Pod under the segment How Urban Planning Has Become Stagnant in Driving Transformation and Innovation. Today you're with your host Mapula Lhlakgonolo Mahale, but also known as Maps. Today we're joined by an amazing town planner that goes by the name of Penashe Sebeta, who will be helping us unpack the topic. I hope you guys enjoy the podcast and hope to see you on the next episode.
Thank you for having me, Mapula. Excited to be here.
Okay, so the first question would be just tell us about yourself, where you started, and how you got into town planning.
Okay, thank you for the question. Hey to all the listeners. My name is Penashe Sebeta. I am a town planner by profession. I started town planning. I think my earliest recollection was when I was 16. I always had a interest in spaces and how spaces develop and how people grow and how we have all these big buildings across the world. And I started thinking, why do we not have all these, a lot of these magnificent buildings? Why do we not have them in the spaces that we live? Or why our space is not as developed or as functional as they can be. And that's how I got into the interest of town planning. And then I grew into it and I loved it. And as soon as I was 60, I think as soon as I was applying for varsity, I knew exactly what I wanted to study. I was fortunate enough to get a placement where I actually wanted to study, one of the best institutes in Africa. And I studied town planning, did it until honors, and I did my master's in project management in the built environment just to complement the space of planning and how we can do that. So yeah, that's my brief background. I do love planning, I love development, and I love seeing places grow and people flourish and do well in their spaces. So that's how and why I got into it.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. So do you think town planning has become a progressive practice in actually driving transformation and innovation post 1994?
I think in the context that we're given and the space that we're in, I think we are heading in the right step. As you know, South Africa is one of the best policies, has the best policies in general across the board. And especially with now our town planning policies that we have Spluma, we have frameworks such as the NSDF, which is the national directive for the country, leading us to 2050. We have a lot of provincial DS frameworks as well, which we have. So I think in terms of policy, we do very, very well. I think where we can do better in is how do we manage getting from our current state to our desired state. Obviously, this is it's the spaces that we work in is very much cross-cutting, and it cross-cuts into different sectors, such as your political sphere, such as your economic sphere, your social sphere. So there are a lot of other factors to consider when actually planning. But do I think it's been progressive? I think with what we've had, yes and no. Yes, in the fact that we do have good policies, we do have good frameworks. No, in terms of we could have been or we could be much further than we currently are in our spaces, in our development, in basically how we manage our cities, our regions, and the country. So yes and no.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you on the policy aspect. I think one of like the one thing that I hear a lot from like a lot of people in South Africa is that like we have the most progressive policies when it comes to like development and like shaping South Africa to be better, right? And like you spoke about like all these policies and like right now I'm just thinking about the housing policy. With the growing urbanization in urban areas, how do you think it has played a role in the growth of informal settlements? So your slums, your informal housing that is around urban areas, what impact has urbanization played in the growth of those?
Okay, no, thanks. I think going back to the policy aspect, I think a lot of our policies, um, well, I think it has contributed to the spaces that we have now. Because obviously, as you know, slums are not really, or they not seem to be progressive. but we also don't have enough space in the city to accommodate for everyone who wants to be within the cities. So now, how do we tackle that? Do we now say, do we obviously, as we have, make it legal to have slums in the city, which obviously brings a lot of the urban decay and so forth. But also, when you look at the social aspects, how does that work in terms of making sure that people do have access to opportunities? Because most of the opportunities that we do have are closer to the city centers, the urban areas, and people want to be close to these spaces. So now, how do we actually tackle that? And I do have a number of things that we can do, or ideas that I've been thinking of. I do think we do need a more inclusive housing system, which includes everyone. Also having housing development, human settlement development within spaces closer to proximities of the city or proximities to where opportunities are. They'll make a big impact. Access to transportation plays a big role as well. But we do find that with access, the costs tend to become higher because people tend to live further away from the city. So it's a, what do we do then? Do we now need to bring our cause, our urban cause, or our economic cause to where people are, which could be an option, or do we now need to integrate people into the city where we can have multiple people who are in different streams of, not different streams of income, but different income groups living in the same space? How do we now integrate that?
Oh, okay. Makes a lot of sense, and it has me thinking. Where you're speaking about bringing people closer to opportunities and so forth, because a lot of people, when you ask them why did you move to the city, majority of them speak about the opportunities that you get in the city compared to wherever they are coming from, right? And
Yes.
with development, we must acknowledge that it takes time, and if we're going to speak about building inclusive housing, it also takes time. So, with the current existing slums and informal areas, how do we then make it a bit more bearable or more functional at the current moment? Considering like the sanitation systems that they have in their areas, considering how they get access to water, how they get access to electricity, how do you make it functional and bearable for them in the meantime while we're still trying to ensure that development takes place in the right way?
I think just looking at a practical way, I think providing a good understanding of what the current situation is to our citizens plays an important role. I think what we've been doing the past 28, 29 years is that we have made so many promises that people will have housing by this date, or people will have access to water, people will have access to electricity by this date. But obviously, with everything that's happening in the well, country and globally, we don't reach these targets and people start becoming frustrated. So it becomes a thing of, how do we now make sure that we are on the same page as the people, as the citizens who want to be in the spaces, for them to understand um, what we're actually doing. And I think it goes back to our both our earlier points, is to how do we make sure we do implementation well, that people actually see development and they are a bit more patient, because I think people are now running out of patience because of all the promises that have been made. um, I think even if you look at our past documents from 1960s, there were promises that were made to the citizens that were never realized or haven't been realized as of yet. So now it becomes important as to, what do we do now? I guess a way we can do this is, I don't want to say through plans, because we've been doing plans for the past 28 years, but actual showing people progress, which is very important. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I share the same sentiments as the people, because it's been like over 20 years since they've been promised housing, they've been promised a better South Africa, and still a lot of the marginalized are living in poor spaces that are not catering to their basic needs. So like with everything, would you what role do you think technology and innovation plays? And would you say that maybe town planners have been using the same methods and they potentially are not reaping the rewards that would think would have by now?
Okay, so I think I'll answer the technology one first. I think in terms of technology, I think as the world develops, we are more exposed to new technology and new innovations. I've recently bumped into, it is fairly new, BIM, which is the Building Infrastructure Management, which actually helps you analyze, or when you do development, actually does the development for you, and it gives you where the faults may be, where the risks may be, and how you should, and how much material is needed, and so forth. So there is a lot of technology that is being used and can be used. As I've noticed as well in the projects that we are doing as well. We use a lot of technology in our innovation and our thinking. I think also with Chat GBT now coming to play, it's going to change a lot. With AI as well coming to play, it will change a lot in terms of our thinking and how we should approach a lot of our challenges that we do have in the country. And yeah, and yeah. Please just say your second question again. Don't think I answered that one.
The second question was, do you think that town planners have been using the same methods and unfortunately have not reaped the rewards of the same methods that they've been using? So, like, would you say that like we must move towards a different direction in terms of like the way we think about transformation and development instead of always focusing on creating plans, as you've said, that are not fully realized as how would think they would be?
Okay, that's a good question. I'll say both yes and no. Yes, in the space that we do need to be more progressive in our thinking as planners and forward thinking, but no, in the sense that we can't leave everyone behind. As planners, it is our role and our duty to make sure that when we do develop, we make sure we cater for everyone. As you know, South Africa has obviously unemployment rate is extremely high, which puts a lot of pressure on government to provide subsidies, grants, and so forth. So the fiscus tends to have doesn't have as much fluidity as it could have. So I think in terms of, I think it'll be important to address our issues first before we move on to advancing with our technology and so forth. Another reason for that is because I think, as we've seen, is when people have technology, have access to technology, they move very, very fast, which I do think technology can do that for us. But we also have a society who don't have access to food every morning, access to the basic necessities, to water, sanitation, and so forth that we spoke about earlier on. So I do think there are lots of needs, basic needs that need to be met before we actually start changing direction into becoming just being more free in our thinking, because we need to address a lot of the challenges we do have. So yes and no.
Interesting. So, like in the next coming 10 years, which shape do you think town planning will be taking in South Africa? Um, Considering what you just said about like the high unemployment rate, that automatically means that there'll be like a higher level of poverty within South Africa, and poverty means that there'll be a growth of more informal settlements, seeing that people cannot afford a certain lifestyle or a certain cost of living. So, what direction do you see town planning take in the next coming years? Looking at after 1994, the main objective was to create spaces that are more inclusive, spaces where people can fully access them because the apartheid system had spatial segregation and had certain barriers. So, with our generation right now, what is our struggle? Is um, what direction are we heading to? Because there's a saying that says every generation has its own struggle. So, like, what struggle does the upcoming town planners have to tackle?
Oh, thank you for your question. That's a good question. I think within the next 10 years, we'll probably have a lot of what's been happening now. I think even when you look at our targets that we set for 2030 through the NDP, we're still far, far behind. And the gap is just continued growing between the rich and the poor. So I think the challenges we'll have will remain the same, very much remain the same, just at a different level. I think there'll be more challenges for us as companies to tackle. We'll have to come up with new innovation. I think we spoke about technology. We'll have to come up with new innovation into tackling these challenges, but the challenges will very much stay the same because I do think we need to um, cover a lot of these challenges before we can actually move or be more in being in a more progressive space. But I guess it also depends from which sector you're asking for. If you're asking from the private sector perspective, I do think we'll see a lot of growth because obviously in that sector there's more money in that space to develop. So we have seen our green cities initiatives that we've seen. I think there's two in Gauteng, there's one in Western Cape. We've seen electronic vehicles come into play. So what role would that have in our spaces? We've seen a move away from from coal generated electricity power to more solar based power or wind based power or hydroelectricity based power. So it's a lot of things that are going to happen, different changes. So I think it depends on which space you'll be in as a planner, and which challenges you probably will determine which challenges you'll be facing.
Well, that's exciting as a new graduate. It's really exciting to hear that, at least in the town planning world, we're moving towards innovation, we're moving towards thinking outside of what we already know, right? And like from you, I just want to know from all the projects that like you've done, what has been like the most impactful project that you've done, and you see that it could potentially be like an initiative that many other spaces take to ensure that we move South Africa towards a better space.
Okay, that's a good one. I think we're currently working on a project right now where we're focusing on IGR. We're working with districts and local municipalities, in improving their IGR into developing what currently is the one plans from the DDM, which started a few years ago. It's probably a bad word to say right now, but yes, we are working with a few locals to develop that. And how do we improve local basically IGR within that space? And I think over time, what we'd like to see is what we've seen so far is there is a drive to we spoke a lot about silos in government space. So there is a drive to improve the silo mentality or the silo thinking, and I think we are working towards obviously not all of it, but in a small way, we're improving the silo mentality, and in just improving IGR. So that's a space we're currently working in, and I'm excited for that.
Well, that's interesting. That's really interesting. So we have reached the end of our interview. So that was the last question. And feel free to ask me any question if there's anything that you'd want to ask me as an upcoming town planner. So yeah.
Okay, now I do have a few questions. As a planner upcoming, what do you feel will be your biggest challenges when you once you start working? Um, yes, what do you think you'll be facing once you've graduated?
Um. Okay. Thank you for the question. I think in my honors year, I've had to understand that as much as when you're a town planner, you want to somehow be a hero and save everyone. Um, there's only so much power that you have in implementing change, considering where you exist. So there's someone that you report to, and there's someone that makes like the greater decisions outside of what you think is most suitable. So it's understanding that there's various stakeholders within the practice that have an influence of actually what takes place. So I understand that there'll be like a bit of frustration with implementing the type of change that I want to implement, but I also needed to understand that there's only so much that you can do as a town planner, and you shouldn't beat yourself up for not being able to do certain things. So yeah.
Okay, okay. And what about in the next 10 years? Anything exciting that you see, or you'd like to be involved in after you start, after you work? Anything specific projects that you'd like to see yourself in, or projects rather, or spaces? What space would you like to see yourself in?
Um, I'm very interested in innovation. So the emergence of smart cities is like something that's very exciting to me because I've seen that like a lot of like private spaces and even like our universities are actually grasping the importance of like the emergence of the fourth IR. I know South Africa is a bit behind because other countries are like on the fifth IR already, but it's nice to see that we're going towards a space where we appreciate technology in every practice. We understand that innovation is actually essential in moving us towards a more convenient space. So I think that's what like I'm most like really excited about, being part of um, the emergence of smart cities in South Africa.
That sounds so exciting. I also can't wait for you to develop a smart city for us. And you should definitely let us know when you make your smart city release so we can come and support you.
Definitely, we'll do. Hopefully, that happens sooner than later. But yes,
No, definitely, we'll definitely be around.
is that all the questions that you have?
Yes, that's all. That's everything from my side.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast. If there's anything that you'd like to say to my lecturer or my classmates, feel free to say it now. So yeah, thank you once again.
Thank you, classmates, for listening to our podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
Thank you once again. I think we'll all agree that that was a really insightful conversation that we had. We're speaking about policy, change, and transformation in South Africa. And it's a pretty exciting conversation seeing how seeing the direction in which South Africa is taking in terms of development. I hope you guys got a bit of insight on the planning world if you don't know what urban planning is. And I hope for our fellow planners, we are at least more hopeful in bringing change and also tackling innovation to ensure that we develop South Africa in the right direction. And I once again like to say thank you to our guests. I'd also like to say thank you to my lecturer and my classmates. I hope to see you guys on the second episode. Bye.